Welcome everyone. Our name is Nova, and today we're going to be reading 2 stories from the book Shifting Hearts. If you're not familiar, it's a collection of 7 romance stories, all focused on otherkin. Per the back of the book, it is said that the eyes are the window to the soul. But what if the soul that looks back isn't as human as you first thought? These 7 captivating and unique love stories shine a spotlight on otherkin, people who identify as being something other than human, from non-human mythical creatures to ravens, coyotes, cats, and dogs. Each tale is a fresh and exciting window into the otherkin subculture. Go on a journey where love isn't always where you thought to find it or who you thought to find it in. If after listening to the stories today you're interested in picking up a copy for yourself, we will have a link in the description with more information on where you can purchase this book. Thanks and enjoy! Like Calls to Like by Esther Day. Every person Joss has ever met had some degree of self-importance. From an egomaniac to the humblest, at some point there is no denying the human disposition of believing in an inflated sense of self-worth. After all, who should be the center of a universe if not oneself? Joss had never particularly felt important or special. He was an average poor kid who grew up to be an average poor guy. Working in service only cemented his worldview of being a fading wallflower in the theater of his own life. There's no quicker way to feel invisible and redundant than earning a paycheck as a shy waiter. He worked in a Waffle House, where people who usually didn't make any more money than he did came to eat the cheap food and had no interest in idle chit-chat or fake smiles. It was actually safest for his tips if he was as unintrusive as possible, appearing and disappearing as soon as possible. Being quiet by nature made Joss used to being overlooked. It was the way he liked it, really. It was what he'd come to expect. It was a Tuesday afternoon in May when everything changed for Josh. He was sitting in the dimly lit break room beside the kitchen when an unfamiliar young man wearing the kitchen staff's apron came in. His features were appealingly striking, his body lean and muscled, and the edges of brightly inked tattoos peeked from under his sleeves. In summary, he was gorgeous, at least in Josh's opinion. Gorgeous people did not notice him, which he was glad for, or else he'd have to remember how to do silly things like form sentences in their presence. "Hey," the new guy said, then actually seemed to follow the polite rules of society and didn't immediately ignore Josh. Instead, he waited, tilting his head slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hi." If Josh's voice had been a heart monitor, he'd be coding. "I'm Alex." He was going to ask a favor. Josh was suddenly sure. He needed to borrow his phone or catch a ride after work. Well, joke was on Alex then. Josh's phone battery was dead, and he took the bus. For some reason, his miserable excuse of an existence made him feel triumphant just then. "Josh." "Awesome. This is my 3rd day of work. I thought I'd met everybody already." Alex sat across from Josh at the wobbly break table, turning the equally balance challenged chair to sit on it backwards, arm folded over the back. "I work nights." Josh sounded reluctant, even to himself. People sometimes joked that he spoke like each word physically pained him. The truth was that it kind of did. "That explains it. So tell me, is Ruth always like a general losing a battle in the kitchen? 'Cause damn, just damn, I haven't been ordered around like that since never. Granted, I think I was working faster, but that's really besides the point." Josh tried not to, but he smiled. Ruth really was a terror in the kitchen. A spatula her sidearm, the deep fryer the hole she condemned contrary kitchen staff to. Alex smiled in return. It was an easy, fluid quirk of his mouth that lit up his face while his eyes danced. Joss felt his stomach swoop and cramp simultaneously, and knew then and there that he was screwed. Alex kept on talking, going on about what he'd learned and who he'd met in the 3 days he'd been in the kitchen, and Josh hung on every word, while uttering a few of his own as possible. Josh had friends. Okay, he had 2 friends. The same friends he'd had since he was 7. He understood how that worked. He had fallen into the groove of familiar friendship, and everything was smooth and easy. He met the guys before they had all their adult teeth, so there wasn't much they all didn't know, accept and understand about one another. What Josh did not understand was how Alex turned into a friend. One day, he had no clue who Alex was. The next, the guy showed up talking and just didn't stop. His voice was a constant on breaks when they shared shifts, making jokes, and telling stories until the sound of him speaking over the distant chatter of pots and pans was expected, welcome, and comforting. Joss even joined in, tried out his rusty sense of dry humor, and Alex always beams and laughed like Christmas had come early. They picked up conversations that had days spanning between them, like no time had passed, and it was easy. Seeing Alex straddling his chair, leaning forward so his chest pressed against the back, with hands gesturing wildly and eyes alight from within, was the highlight of Josh's day. The truth was, while Josh had 2 friends, now 3, he had little else. He worked constantly because the need for mundane things like food, rent money, and medicine wasn't going anywhere. When he wasn't at the restaurant, he was working under the table at the car wash down the street, or holed up in the studio apartment putting together tiny little motherboards for what he assumed was the going rate for child labor in Thailand. Josh had been diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 16, which meant at 22, with no real skill set, he was financially hurting in a way his aimless peers weren't. He applied for better paying jobs all the time, but until something more worthwhile came along, Josh got by. But getting by, dragging himself from one poorly paid job to another, wore him down and isolated him in a way only workaholics could be. 3 weeks after meeting Alex, the novelty of having him as a work friend hadn't worn off, but Josh was worn out. One minute Josh had been eating all the overly buttered vegetables and potatoes he'd gotten from the kitchen, while listening to Alex go on about the movie he'd seen the night before with his roommates. The next it was quiet, and Josh's cheek was mashed into something bony and warm. Josh mumbled a confused noise, prying heavy eyes open to realize that Alex had moved to sit beside him at the table, so Josh could lean against his shoulder while he slept. "What happened?" Josh asked, voice rough, and he blinked gummy eyes hard as he sat up. Immediately he missed Alex's warmth. Josh's whole body ached in a way that had nothing to do with napping in an awkward sitting position. Loneliness, it seemed, could feel like any other ailment. He hadn't really touched anyone, platonically or otherwise, in a long time. The urge to slump back down and nuzzle against Alex, to press his warmth and get lost in the feeling it sent of him, was almost overwhelming. "You fell asleep. I was just about to wake you up. Our break is almost over." We looked at one another, Alex full of his good humor, and Josh sleep-stupid with no clue what was on his face. For a second he was lost. Did he thank Alex, or was it easier to ignore his kindness? Then his brain caught up with Alex's words, and Josh was up like a starting pistol had gone off. The weight of his insulin kit was heavy in his pocket, and the whole way to the bathroom. He could not afford to get sick, not even a little bit. It wasn't until Josh had capped and trashed his syringe that he'd realized he'd left Alex without a word. It seemed ignoring that intimate moment was the way to go then. Sunday nights were always the most boring shifts. People tended to stay home, hoarding the last few hours of their weekend behind closed doors. It also made catching the bus that much harder, since there were fewer people out and about, it usually running on time, and Josh usually didn't. When he'd mentioned it absently to Alex while they shared dinner in the break room, he was surprised by Alex insisting he could drive Josh home that night, and wouldn't take no for an answer. That was how Josh found himself at 10:30 standing in the kitchen, outright staring at Alex while he cleaned the last of the cutlery. As a rule, none of the waitstaff spent a lot of time loitering in the kitchen. For one, no one had tips for them in there, and two, there wasn't much room to spare to tuck oneself out of the way. Josh wasn't finding that last part very trying, as Alex had to repeatedly brush past as he cleaned and straightened. At one point, Alex rested a hand on Josh's shoulder and leaned across him to set a container on the counter behind them. That was how Josh got his first good look at the tattoo on Alex's bicep. "It's a dragon," he said dumbly, and Alex stopped mid-stretch to stare, their faces so close their noses almost touched. "What?" Alex asked, his eyes inexplicably round. "Your tattoo. It's a dragon." Josh was blushing. He could feel the heat rising up his neck and stain his cheeks. He wasn't sure if he was embarrassed by how idiotic he must have sounded, befuddled over Alex's closeness. Or both? Oh, yeah. Alex finally stepped back and pulled up his sleeve. A traditional Chinese dragon curled around his arm, its serpentine spine a vivid red, its jaw open in a brutal-looking snarl. This one is too, Alex said, and started unbuttoning his shirt. Joss had to grab hold of the counter behind him and hoped it wasn't obvious that his heart rate had ratcheted up at the sight of Alex undressing. Alex stopped midway and pulled his collar aside to reveal another tattoo inked over his heart. This one was a stylized dragon in black, its body elegantly twisted, its wings graceful and powerful-looking arches. All Joss wanted to do was press his lips to Alex's skin and see if it tasted different from his unmarked flesh. Awesome, Joss got out, borrowing one of Alex's favorite words. Alex grinned. Yeah, like calls to like, you know? You're not a dragon, Joss said plainly, even as something childlike recoiled inside him from the villainous imagery dragons preoccupied in his mind. Too many kids' movies, he presumed. Sure I am, Alex said matter-of-factly, buttoning his shirt back up with downcast eyes. No, Joss insisted. He couldn't reconcile Alex, kind, cheerful Alex, with the image of a ravaging creature with acidic drool and bloody claws. You're not evil. You don't hoard treasure or breathe fire, man. Alex laughed, and for the first time ever, the sound wasn't a happy burst. It was a weary, tired edge that Joss didn't understand. I'm glad you don't think I'm evil, but I have my dickish moments, and I hoard things I think are important. His tone was serious, and Joss had no clue how they deviated to this place, comparing mythical creature to Alex's character with such gravity. We all do, Joss said quickly, wanting to reassure Alex somehow. Almost done in there, guys? Georgette, the night manager, asked on her way to lock the night's earnings in the safe. Sure, Alex said, blowing up the towel he'd been cleaning with and throwing it like a basketball into the bin by the door, his easy smile back when he made the shot. What are you still doing here, Joshua? Georgette called from the door. You'll miss your bus, sweetie. Josh hated being called by his full name more than he did sweetie, but Diner Life had taught him anyone who poured someone else's coffee inevitably got dubbed with incredulous nicknames. I'm giving him a ride. Alex raised his voice to answer for him. Yeah? Mike, a new part-timer working his way through school, stuck his head into the kitchen. Can you give me one too? My sister's running late to picking me up. Instead of an immediate, good-natured agreement, like Josh expected, Alex stared blankly at Mike for a moment. Where do you live? He finally asked, sounding non-committal. Off Pine and 3rd. That's in the totally wrong direction for us, man. Alex shrugged. Worth a shot. Mike disappeared again. Josh looked at Alex, who seemed to smile reflectively. Ready? Josh nodded, not trusting his voice. It was stupid, but Alex giving him a ride when he wouldn't to another coworker made him feel special. Important, maybe. He hadn't felt that way in a long time, and it warmed him so that when Alex smiled at him as they climbed into the beat-up car, Josh was helpless to do anything but smile back. Josh had never been camping before. He had an idealized image in his head of Boy Scouts making fire with sticks and peering over cliff faces to name exotic birds. Again, it was probably too many kids' movies to blame for that. All in all, he'd never given much thought to pitching a tent somewhere. He was a city kid, and the one vacation he could remember his mom taking him on to a water park was hazy but happy memory. None of this explained why he immediately agrees to go on a camping trip with Alex and his friends, almost before Alex could finish inviting him. Maybe because it would be nice to get away, or maybe because he wanted to give that whole nature thing a try, or maybe he should own up and admit to himself how far gone he was for Alex. He could have been asking for a kidney and Josh would have agreed before having to think about it, so long as they could share a recovery room. He'd been friends with Alex for 2 months when Josh found himself standing in the dirt, squinting at all the open space around him and feeling oddly claustrophobic. His skin itched a little, like it wasn't used to this much unfiltered sunlight all at once. It was so quiet, Josh found himself resisting the urge to tilt his head like he needed to drain water from his ears. There was no hum of electricity, no background noise of humanity thumping and trudging along beside him in his apartment building or at the restaurant. There was only the sound of the wind through the leaves, the buzz of insects, and... Why are you frowning? Alex asked, laughter in his voice as he got the last tent pole snapped into place. It's weird, Josh shrugged, trying not to feel self-conscious, and failing when Alex's friends, Heather Emma, and Johnny all turned to look at him. "What is?" Emma asked, her face open and ready to share whatever the joke was. "Nature," Josh said, and everyone laughed. Josh couldn't help but frown again when he shifted his weight and felt the give of the soil under his sneakers. He never knew he could miss asphalt before. He was just starting to consider wandering out of their camping spot into the paved road they'd driven in on. Maybe he'd adjust better if he took this whole camping thing in baby steps, when Alex's arm wrapped around his shoulders. "Weird isn't bad, man. This is going to be so much fun. You'll see." Alex was grinning right at him, and Josh felt his lips echo the look out of reflex. "If it's so bad, I'll let you borrow my phone and you can watch the bad TV I have downloaded while you try and sleep in one of the cars," Heather offered as she and Johnny finished storing food in the wooden cabinet that stood behind the well-worn fire pit. "He's not going to sleep in the car," Alex said, like Heather was suggesting Josh strip naked and go in search of Bigfoot, because that was ridiculous, right? Bigfoot wasn't a thing. Josh was pretty sure. He glanced around at the trees again and realized bears really were a thing, even if yetis weren't. The others were talking amongst themselves when Alex leaned close. "Nothing's going to jump out at us," he reassured in a low tone. And Josh impulsively leaned into Alex's solid presence at his side. Alex smirked and squeezed his shoulder tight before letting go. "Let's have fun," he announced, and dragged them all off into the uncharted territory that was the campground wilderness. The thing was, after Josh forgot to feel out of place around all the foliage, he found he was having fun. Alex was all smiles and boundless energy as he led them all down dirt paths and over rocks and fallen trees. Alex was always a buoyant, happy force in whatever room he was in. But without walls to contain him, he became a beacon of joy. His exuberance was catching, and Josh felt like a kid, ready to dig his fingers into something and marvel at any new discoveries. Josh and Alex wandered away from the others when the girls got preoccupied with taking pictures. Alex followed a tiny trail overgrown with weeds that he easily traversed, and the rich smell of growth and pollen was strong in his wake. They found a small cave hidden amongst an outcropping of rocks, and Alex disappeared inside, while Josh more carefully picked his way to the entrance. He found Alex standing in the darkness several yards into the cave. His eyes were closed as he breathed in the cool air. With a heavy weight of rock above them and the surprisingly appealing smell of damp earth around them, Josh watched Alex relax and realized he'd never seen his friend more at home. Josh had also never been more drawn to him. That night there was indeed a campfire, though Emma used a lighter and old Cosmo pages to start it, and not twigs and ingenuity. They'd roasted hot dogs over the flames, more for the fun of it than the desire to eat them. Josh was having a great time, and so long as he didn't look into the night where the darkness swallowing the surroundings so completely it was kind of spooky, he couldn't remember ever having a better time. Josh was listening to Heather explain the merits of thrift store shoes when a rustling across the fire had him looking up. Alex had hiked to the campground background and was back. Firelight danced across Alex as he moved with a fluid grace out of the undergrowth behind their tents. The slight breeze had the smoke from the fire curling around Alex as he approached. Emma had danced away from the soot when she'd wandered into the path before, but not Alex. The haze embraced him, and he only seemed happier for it, smiling as he caught Josh looking. The heat of the flames distorted the air between them, and for a moment it looked like Alex was exhaling a plume of smoke. "Dragon," Josh's brain whispered. The thought came out of left field, sending him back to the night he'd seen Alex's tattoos. True, Alex didn't look anything like the artwork decorating his body, but suddenly the comparison wasn't nearly as confusing or unappealing. Being quiet by nature meant Josh ended up not talking about a lot of things. It wasn't intentional. He didn't mean to keep things about himself secret. Usually nothing seemed worth remarking on if someone else was perfectly happy carrying the conversation. Josh hadn't even realized he'd kept his diabetes a secret. He practically ate all of his meals around Alex, but when Alex stuck into their tent and found Josh with a flashlight under his chin as he capped his insulin syringe, they both froze. An odd, forced quirk to Alex's mouth made Josh realize he'd never seen that look directed at him before, and felt unexplainably touched. Alex had never made sense, not the way he'd automatically taken to Josh, or how he'd seemed to occupy a special place in Alex's regard. He didn't go out of his way to buddy up to the other coworkers, and the whole day with Alex, his friend, he'd stuck close to Josh, making sure he got all the inside jokes, while Alex didn't explain their own. Alex especially didn't make sense just then. He twitched the tent door closed behind him, like he was shielding Josh from being seen by anyone else. "What's going on? Sharing is caring, man," Alex tried to joke, but his face wasn't used to doing anything disingenuous, so it didn't translate well. It took Josh a moment to realize what conclusions Alex must have drawn, and actually burst out laughing. "It's insulin. I'm diabetic," Josh explained, still huffing with amusement as he watched Alex relax. Oh, that's why you go off to the bathroom after eating." "What?" Josh asked, shoving his medical supply back into the little pouch he always kept in his pocket. "I thought you either had embarrassing bladder issues or you were bulimic. You really?" Alex shrugged before his eyes went round. "You just ate like 3 marshmallows. What the hell? Are you going to be okay?" Alex's serious worry had Josh ducking to hide his pleased smile. It'd been a while since anyone had really worried about him. Alex made him feel special, and Josh had no idea what to do about it. Reassuring Alex about marshmallows not sending him into a diabetic coma morphed into Josh getting interrogated about other things he hadn't told Alex. Eventually they settled into their sleeping bags, lying close to share the foam pad Alex had unrolled on the floor of the tent. "Ever break any bones?" Alex yawned around the question. "Ankle. I was 5 and tripped coming down the steps out of our building. The sad thing was, I was only 3 steps to the ground." Josh smiled at the memory, remembering how worried his mom had been, and how she'd held him just as tightly in the ER waiting room as she had that night, rocking him to sleep in a way she hadn't since he had been far younger. She had scolded him when he tried to blame himself and apologize. Even at 5, he'd had no illusions about money and how they didn't have an excess of it. She scolded him and held him all night, pressing kisses into his hair until he fell asleep. It was well into the night, but nearly a full moon provided more light than Josh would have guessed. He could see Alex lying on his stomach, curled slightly towards Josh. His breathing was evening out, expression relaxing in a way it hadn't since the whole interrogation had started. Josh slid his hand across the mat, curling his fingers to rest just beside Alex's arm, where his body heat was like a brand. Josh wanted to touch, but he couldn't bridge the gap. He felt inexplicably brave for the small movement he'd made. Very soon, he found his own eyes drifting shut. The last coherent thought that filtered through his brain was to wonder if Alex didn't like to press his back against things. He slept on his stomach, sat in every chair backwards, and sometimes sat forward while he drove like he was overeager to get there. For some reason, Josh's sleepy brain connected those dots but couldn't take them to a conclusion before he was dreaming. Josh and Alex had been friends for almost 5 months when Georgette pulled Josh into the break room and pointed to Alex, who was sitting with his face pressed into the table. "Take him home," was all she said, a touch of concern in her voice. Alex let out a weak groan, and Josh was beside him in seconds. "What's wrong?" "I think it's the flu. Seriously, take him home, please. Mike's already out with this bug. We really don't need it spreading around," Georgette said before marching out of the room. Josh's shift was just about over, so he wasn't going to be out any money. Even if he would have been, he still would have dropped everything to take care of Alex. Since that cramping trip, they had been hanging out a lot more outside of work. It hadn't done anything to mute Josh's attraction, but he wasn't overly concerned about that. Alex let out a pitiful and congested-sounding groan when Josh grabbed his arm to help him stand. "Keys?" Josh asked, and Alex handed them over without comment. Josh didn't drive much, so he blamed his hypervigilance while he drove Alex home on his lack of experience and not how worried and protective he felt. Emma and Johnny weren't home, so the apartment they all shared was quiet when Josh got them inside. He'd become pretty familiar with the layout of the place and easily got Alex into bed and brought him Gatorade from the fridge and pain meds from the cabinet in the bathroom. Almost without thinking, Josh plugged Alex's phone in to charge. Alex got super worried about having a dead battery. Alex lay on his stomach, his face pale and eyes glazed. "Thanks, man," he mumbled. Josh nodded and barely resisted the urge to say, "Anytime." No matter how fond Josh was of Alex, they were very definitely just friends, maybe even best friends. I'm going to hang out for a bit. Shamelessly watch daytime TV. Yell if you need something, Josh said, and Alex pressed his face into his pillow, but not before Josh saw the smile. He flapped a hand at Josh, which he took as permission to take over his couch. When Josh checked on him after 3 episodes of I Love Lucy, Alex had added sweat and coughing into the mix. How are you feeling? Josh asked helplessly. Awful. Even my tail hurts, Alex rasped. Josh blinked before pressing the back of his hand to Alex's forehead. He had a fever, but he wasn't that warm. Not hallucination warm. Perplexed, Josh impulsively swept his hand above Alex's ass, fingers cleanly swiping through the air where he assumed any tail Alex might have had would live. He didn't feel a thing, but Alex twitched, huffing out a pained sigh. Josh snatched his hand back and looked over his shoulder guiltily, like there was someone there to witness, whatever this was. I'm going to get you some more medicine, he announced, and hurried out of the room, feeling like he'd done something wrong and more confused than he could have ever remembered being. After that, Alex mostly slept, and Josh didn't disturb him again. Josh wasn't used to stifling the urge to talk, but just then he had a million questions and no one to bounce them off of. Ridiculously, Josh thought if he gave voice to these weird occurrences he was only now puzzling out, they'd make some sort of sense. Stewing his confused thoughts certainly wasn't going to bring anything to light. When Emma came through the door, shoes in hand and a tired but welcome smile thrown in his direction, Josh couldn't stay quiet any longer. Alex is sick, Josh said, and snapped his mouth shut out of reflex, feeling like a dam was breaking just behind his teeth and wasn't sure it would be less destructive to allow it or fight it. He'd hung out with Emma plenty, but he didn't know her like he knew Alex. Didn't know if he was about to betray something or someone in his need to make sense of Alex claiming to have a tail. Yeah, he was feeling bad last night. I think he got it from Johnny. He's just getting over a bug, Emma said as she dropped all her stuff on the counter and stuck her head in the refrigerator. Josh leaned forward on the couch to watch her, debated for half a second before the dam broke, and words burst out of him without his permission. Yeah, he's out of it, and he said something about having a tail? Emma's spine went stiff. She took a few moments too long to look at him to make her reaction anything close to casual. Oh yeah? Yeah, what's that about? Emma shrugged, but she looked anything but confused. You should ask him. They stared at one another for a long moment, and Josh hated the silence in a way he rarely ever did. I will, he said eventually, and Emma smiled, like he said exactly the right thing. Good. You hungry? I was going to order pizza. Josh nodded and leaned back on the couch. He'd let the dam break, let the need to have answers wash out his normally timid nature, and he found himself more out to sea than ever. 3 days later, Alex was back to work and acting like everything was normal. That was Josh's fault, though. First, he'd waited for Alex to be healthy and to have the talk he'd promised Emma, and then he realized he didn't have any clue how to bring it up. Alex took Josh's awkward silence for the normal garden variety kind and easily carried the conversation during their shared dinner break. It wasn't until Alex was giving him a ride home after work, sitting forward in the driver's seat and leaning over the steering wheel, that Josh opened his mouth. Why do you do that? He asked, apropos of nothing, and Alex gave him a questioning look. Can you pull over? Josh felt like he had to move, to fidget, to get away maybe. For 3 days his mind had been like a skipping record, repeating Alex's words, cycling through odd memories, an endless spiral of confusion with no conclusion in sight. Are you all right? Alex asked, pulling into the empty library parking lot. The building was dark, save for a few security lights, and the old park beside it had only one working lamppost. The playground equipment was thrown into stark shadows, creating alien shapes. It reminded Josh of camping, huddling close to the fire against the night, an animal instinct buried deep inside that had been fearful of things he couldn't see. Alex had stepped out of that darkness like he belonged to it. He looked ethereal and unreal, and the wonderful kind of dangerous. Josh had felt like he was really seeing Alex for the first time. For as open as Alex was, and easy as he was with his words and his kindness, there was an unexpected savage quality Josh had glimpsed that night, and he had been hungry to understand since. Josh got out of the car, started towards the brightest source of light on instinct, and stopped abruptly when he didn't hear Alex following. He stood by the car, hidden in the long shadow Josh's body made. They stared at one another, and Josh watched worry flood Alex's expression, though for once he had nothing to say. "You said you have a tail," Josh blurted. The few yards between them felt like miles, like he was shouting someone's secrets across a chasm and waiting to hear if they echoed back, sounding just as strange as he thought they would. Alex visibly startled, and they stared at each other while Josh's heart pulsed rapidly and his palms started to sweat. When Alex moved, he was slow about it, cautious, like he was trying not to spook Josh. It was too late for that, Josh thought, but didn't budge as Alex carefully erased the distance between them. "Have you heard of otherkin before?" Josh shook his head. Otherkin are people who have a soul, or, some say, share a soul that isn't human. This soul, it can be an animal or even a mythical creature, things long gone from this earth, or that have never existed outside of an ethereal plane. That's what I am, Alex explained in a calm tone that reflected his earlier cautious approach. Josh didn't have words. He had no clue what to even begin to say while he processed all the new information, and the silence must have worried Alex, because he went on in a rush. "I don't talk about it because it's hard to explain, but it's who I am. It fits. It's who I am when I dream and how I see myself just under my skin. I said something about a tail when I was sick and out of it, right? I'm sorry. That must have been weird. I know this is. I wouldn't have chosen to tell you that way. I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified you'd call me crazy and then not want to ever speak to me again and then Josh kissed him because he still hadn't found the words, but he finally understood what had been happening for the last 5 months, and he didn't need to speak to react to that. There was no reason for Alex to be terrified about anything unless he cared as deeply as Josh did for him. For a horrible moment, Alex was frozen and unresponsive, and Josh thought he had got it wrong, that he'd misheard or hurriedly jumped to wanted conclusions, but then Alex cupped his jaw and deepened the kiss. Josh clung to Alex and shuddered happily when Alex licked into his mouth. The embrace was primal heat and unchecked want, and Josh was lost in it. Josh had never felt very special or remarkable, but Alex was. He was fun and happiness and just otherworldly apparently. Alex was right. It did fit. Alex made sense in a way no one else did, no one else could, and Josh never wanted to let him go. All too soon, Alex pulled back, and they panted at one another. Josh had no idea what his expression was saying, but Alex looked like a mix between concussed and wondrous. "Dragon?" Josh asked, realizing Alex hadn't said it that night, but he had before. Josh slid his hand from Alex's shoulder to rest over his heart, where he knew the tattoo of a black serpentine dragon was inked to his skin. "Yeah, dragonkin," Alex agreed. Josh didn't know exactly what Alex was trying to articulate, but he answered anyway. "Yes," he said, quietly. He was pretty sure when it came to Alex, his answer would always be yes. "I'll have questions. I just can't think right now. With you, so yes," Josh breathed against Alex's lips. And they were kissing again. Lying in Alex's bed hours later after Josh had discovered for himself that Alex's tattoos taste just the same as his ink-free skin, but before the sun had come up, Josh found himself smiling. He was tucked against Alex's side, their legs tangled together, and Alex smiled back. "What color are your scales?" Josh asked sleepily. "A gray-blue," Alex said quietly, fingers tracing idle patterns on Josh's back that made him shiver. Josh had thought up questions and got a few of them between the pressing need to kiss and touch Alex. He'd learned that Alex had always felt different, that even as a child he had known he was something other. He'd apparently declared he was a dragon at the age of 3, rather out of the blue, or so Alex's mom had told him, and proceeded to make sheet and blanket caves to sleep in until his parents bribed him out of it. Also, to Josh's surprise, his dragon didn't breathe fire or have poisonous talons. "So the cave thing, that's true," Josh stated, rather than having to ask. He'd seen that one for himself. "Yes," Alex agreed. "What about hoarding treasure?" Alex didn't have excessive collections, nor had Josh seen any pack rat tendencies Or at least none that were blown out of proportion that would land him on a reality TV show. Alex snorted in amusement. I shoved money in the mattress. It's my version of curling up on a pile of gold. Really? No. Alex grinned, for it turned a little sly. I might start keeping things I treasure on top of the mattress, though, Alex whispered and kissed Joss, and it was a hungry, possessive caress. Yeah, okay, I could get behind that, Joss gasped when Alex finally let him up for air. Alex burst into laughter, and Josh blushed before joining him. Josh couldn't remember ever being happier. He wouldn't change Alex for anything. He'd keep him just as he was, tail and all. Junebug Alien by Elizabeth Coppin. June 3rd, last year. We are not engaged, with shades of yet. A happily domesticated living together, and 1+1 pet cats, who had strictly no access to the foot of the bed. We were that late 20s, 4 years running, saving for our first home, meatless Mondays, and Italian night Thursdays brand of content. Happy was how friends spoke of us, or perhaps settled, a good match, or work well together. Frankly, if our friends were to describe their ideal relationship, they'd often call it something like Jason and Lucy. Jason enjoyed old sitcoms, filing systems, clean clothes on the floor, and the sight of books in a bookcase. I liked the feel of old paper, an overstocked kitchen, sex on all fours, and how he smelled after a warm day. We were cat people, with nothing against dogs, and we both hated rain. I brought with me the never-ending kitchen tools with functions both civic and conceptual. He contributed with the slouching, steel filing cabinet in the corner of our office. I say, with confidence, that we loved each other as best you can. September 23rd, last year. We have both smooth pro-con lists on the matter. Absolutely no plans, however, but a certain je ne sais quoi sort of affection for tax breaks and property law. Without a heavy wedding ledger, we end up eloping. Picnic lunch to follow next week. Champagne for all involved. November 8th, last year. I was 26 when my parents, who meant well, first asked, "Are you thinking about kids?" The question chased me all across work, friendly conversation, dinners out, and family reunions. Jason's mother's eyes smiling kindly, eyes furtive for grandchildren and genetic lineage. Jason's co-workers, face ripe and curious, asked when Jason was going to bread my oven, as though anybody could not catch that drift. My best friend, child-free and rootless, questioned my uterus. My brother, with his 2 slobbery toddlers and a well-behaved dog underfoot, wondered every few phone calls, and privately, I am quite sure they all meant well. Even Jason, rolled away, naked and panting, looked at me a little curiously some evenings, a little sidelong. December 12th, last year. Jason was a white-collar man with a flair for tech support. I was an alien when skinned. Whilst Jason dreamt of small pieces of every day, loose ideas of grandeur and heroism, portraits of a very, very Homo sapien soul, I dreamt in vast shadows and jeering light, sometimes of rooftops, perfect balance, but mostly of trees, branches curled like labyrinths. I am lost, and I wake far from home, skin and self. When Jason thought of children with sapling straight legs, downy hair, and soft, yielding skin, I dreamt of cubs. Not bottle-fed kittens, not meowling leopards, not deer-spotted lions. I thought of small cubs that have nothing to do with this world. I thought of 6-clawed, clumsy grace, curved-spined cubs who I'd let suckle from my wrists, who I would teach to avoid deep, poisonous water, who I would teach to speak in thrilled noises and whirls. I want nothing to do with squalling apes, including my own body, but Jason dreams of tiny versions of us with whom he can share his planet, tech support and all. He wants it as thickly and powerfully as he wants his next breath. As much as I desire, he takes it. It is such a human thing to create another human. March 30th, this year. Are you thinking about kids? No, of course not. I think about small, furred, four-legged, spring-heeled, twist-boned aliens who are so far from alien for me. I think about showing my cubs how to bite through the throats of my cats without a meatless Monday in sight. I think about cubs who can hunt and speak languages I cannot explain. I want a spun nest of ferns. I pull up the duvet to my neck, and I want a mate biting at my throat. Jason kisses my collarbones. I want delicate carnivore cubs, and he rubs his hands and cups my stomach's curve. And I will never have this. May 16th, this year. Are you thinking about kids? Oh well, we'll see this June, won't we, Luce? June 2nd, this year. June swings around, jaunty and fresh-faced, and now we are officially trying. Trying as though I have put an ounce of effort in except for the natural push-pull of this body, this skin spit of blood and yank of hormones. There are schools of thought that hold a relationship cannot compromise in a few matters, up to and including children. My passive attitude is sure to curry resentment, they would argue. Instead, it engenders something between apathy, acceptance, and that familiar emptiness. Growing up in the wrong skin altogether makes you wonder if perhaps you are simply imagining all those innards you think you have. Something that doesn't show up on an x-ray and defies the CAT scan. I swear I am a hunched-up predator from a planet that has the Milky Way as a constellation in its skies. But I feel like an empty sack of human flesh that my husband bids to fill with something equally human. Perhaps he already has, for I love so humanly. The culture chokes me, sates me, even though I am hungry and empty and lonely for things I cannot name, not in this language. How I have been raised has left an irreversible stamp on me, like the shape of a mold on what it has made. Never mind that I am made of some synthetic rubber and not fiberglass human. It is hard to explain why I consent to my husband trying, frustrating attempts to impregnate me. It is hard to explain why I am in word, if not essence, both human and trying for a baby. For all my lack of interest in the proceedings of a reproductive system, I am expecting by August. I do not think I would have known how to object, because I am very sure that on the list of things in a relationship cannot differ on, species or sanity are both deal breakers. August 29th, this year. Somewhere in my head, the light still jeers, mocks me, tells me that I will soon look down at a fleshy, tan bundle in my arms and see nothing familiar. Somewhere in my chest, the trees tower over me, whisper that my body brings nothing fanged, nothing clawed, nothing furred, that nothing with a tight kink of tail and spine comes from me. Somewhere inside of me, the familiar alien paces back and forth through the cage of my skin, my 5 fingers, my flat face, my bipedal, and the motion makes me heartsick. I have nothing against offspring. And how I love so humanly, how I love like domesticated living together, not quite engaged, meatless Mondays and Italian night Thursdays, how I love so humanly. Are you expecting a boy or a girl? Just healthy. I'm not even hoping for human. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked these stories and want to check out the others in Shifting Hearts, there will be a link in the description below so you can purchase the book yourself. We hope you have a great rest of the day and also a great con.